All right, well, we are here with Dr. Kyle Peck, and we appreciate you being here with us today.
My pleasure.
To tell us about yourself. And I'd like to begin, if you would be able to tell me about an overview of who you are and your career.
Sure. I'm Kyle Peck. I'm a professor of education and research fellow at Penn State University. My career began as a middle school teacher. I started teaching middle school in Pasadena, California, right above the Rose Bowl in a private school, a Chandler School. Then taught for 5 years in Leadville, Colorado, up in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. Came down to get my master's and PhD at Boulder, University of Colorado Boulder. And while I was there, I ended up working in corporate training for 5 years at NBI. NBI was the creator of word processing. That's how old I am, right? So I was working for the company that basically invented word processing. And that was an outstanding experience. And then I went from there to Penn State University. I followed Mike Hanifin, who was my advisor at Colorado, who went to Penn State University, and I ended up following him to Penn State, where I've been for the last 26 years.
Okay. And could you tell me a little bit about the primary focus of your work?
The primary focus of my work has always been the application of technology in schools. It started with an interest as a middle school teacher. I was one of the first people to take microcomputers into a classroom. Started with the Radio Shack TRS-80s. I was the first one to bring even actually microcomputers into my county in Colorado. And then it moved through to different technologies in schools with a focus on K-12 schools. And now my interest is turning. It turned to school reform, from technology in schools to what schools can become given the rapid developments in technology. During that time, I created a charter school in State College, Pennsylvania, to try and implement some ideas. It was easier to do it in a charter school than to do it inside public schools. And now my attention's turning to the changes that are going on in society and in technology and how that's likely to influence higher education. So now I'm moving my focus from K-12 to higher education at the moment.
Yeah. Well, you told us a little bit about your interests. How did you originally get interested in this field?
Well, I was interested because I was a teacher in a middle school, like most teachers, not presenting at conferences or anything. But I went to a conference where somebody showed us how to program in BASIC on the Radio Shack TRS-80. And I thought that was really interesting, and I thought maybe my students would like to do that too. And so I got interested in programming and actually had middle school students starting to program in BASIC back in the late 70s, actually.
Wow.
So it was pretty exciting, and I got excited with that. And then I saw how when you put technology in the hands of students, how rapidly they would grow and how captivating that could be. So I sort of discovered by mistake the power of letting students take control over the technologies rather than using it to do what you intend it to do.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. I know you touched a little bit on this, but could you describe your career path in terms of, again, the educational institutions, different jobs, and places of employment?
Okay. I went to Occidental College here in Los Angeles, right in the heart of Los Angeles, as my undergraduate degree. Started with an interest in political science, but I was also a student athlete, and I ended up getting a job through my football coach at schools, like as a noon aide. So I would go and supervise the kids on the playground, and found out that I was actually pretty good with kids, with school-age kids. So I thought, maybe I'll try education. Did that. Also, another pivotal moment was when I was involved in a research study that was done about teachers, existing teachers in schools, and just bright college students who were given 20 minutes to prepare a lesson and teach it. And so I actually taught a lesson before I was even thinking about becoming a teacher, and thought that went pretty well. And then from there I went out and actually did teach 2 years in Pasadena, 5 years in Leadville, before I went for my master's and PhD at the University of Colorado Boulder in educational psychology with an emphasis in educational technology. Then So I had 7 years out before I came back and went to school, but I never really meant to leave middle school. I loved teaching middle school. I have that twisted chromosome that lets you work with middle school kids and actually enjoy who they are. I think they're really special. And but I ended up, the mine closed down back in Leadville, Colorado. So I could have gone back at the end of my PhD and pushed somebody else out of a job. I had enough seniority to do that, or I could just move on. And so the company I worked at, NBI, the one that invented word processing, offered me a job as an instructional designer. And then within a year or two, I was running the customer documentation group, and then within another year, I was running the whole training center for this computer company.
Wow.
That was, big deal. So I got to see how companies work and got some corporate experience from there. Then Mike Hannafin, who was my advisor, had moved to Penn State, and we were writing a book, the first book I think it was, on computer-based instruction. And his chapters were done, mine weren't. He said, why don't you have your chapters done? I said, well, because I work for a living, you guys in higher education, you have all the time in the world. And he said, well, the best job in the country is available, why don't you come out and interview? I said, no. He said, you won't get it, just come out for the interview. He didn't really say that, but he said, you might not even get it. If you do, you can turn it down. Please come out for the interview. So at that moment, though, I had been reading Reinventing the Corporation by John Nesbitt. And chapter 4 was called Reinventing Education. And it asked the question, what would education look like if we were to invent it for the first time today? In other words, if we could walk away from all the tradition and all the baggage and all the assumptions and just build something, would it look like what we have today, or would it be very different? So with that question in my mind, I went to interview for a higher ed position. I did get the offer, and I decided that's what I was going to go find out. If we, so I came into higher education with the goal of reinventing K-12 education. And like Charlie Raguth and a bunch of our peers here at AECT, found that's a little more difficult than one might think it would be, and 25 years later, still working on it.
All right. Wonderful. How would you describe your research interests and aspirations when you first started your career, and you did that a little bit, and maybe now how did they change with time?
Boy, I would describe them as like a kid in a candy store. I mean, there's so many interesting things, so many unanswered questions. And any attempt to answer one question reveals like 3 more. So I have never found it difficult to find interesting things to look at. Lately, my role sort of evolved. I've been the director of a large research lab, the Rural Mid-Atlantic, the Regional Education Lab, under a contract to the U.S. Department of Education, and then running a project for NASA. So lately, and now I'm running a center called the Center for Online Innovation and Learning. So lately I've been sort of in an administrative position and haven't been able to spend as much time doing my own original research, more running research organizations that support scholars and contributing as a collaborator. But I think pretty much it's moved from how can this technology help somebody learn to how can we change the environment in which we expect people to learn to, now how do all these forces right now that are acting right now, the increasing cost of higher education, global economic collapses of countries, increasing cost of higher education, MOOCs, digital badges, just the open educational resources, prior learning assessment, all kinds of tools that are being developed to support peer-supported learning and so on. So I'm just really looking at, my current question is this time different? Are we really at a place where education is finally going to change? I keep hearing everybody say, what we should expect. Well, they thought movies were going to change education. They thought video. They thought computers. Every time something comes along, they think it's going to change education. And is it really different now? And the answer, several of us believe, is yes, because it's not just one new innovation. It's a convergence of many factors, including, financial, social, and people's expectations. So I think we are living in a very unusual moment at which education will change. And people like you who are in this, in this field now will have a wonderful life ahead of you to steer this massive set of changes that I believe are really about to happen.
All right.
Of course, I could be wrong, but I'm willing to.
We'll
I'm
see.
willing to stake my reputation on that now,
All right.
for what it's worth.
That'll be interesting to see. So the next question was, what are your current research interests? Is there anything else more that you want to say in terms of that?
I think that pretty much sums it up. I might add to that sort of the institutional factors that are involved. So how do higher ed institutions make decisions with regard to stopping the current business and adding new products? For example, right now we sell degrees. That's what people want. That's what people need. It's a ticket that has been around for centuries. But now, employers aren't really interested as much in degrees. They're sort of saying, well, we got a lot of people with degrees who can't necessarily do what I want, and so on and so on. And digital badging makes it possible to have smaller units that people can maybe put together in different combinations. And so how do institutions, in some higher ed institutions, unions, how do these decisions get made? Who actually has the power to move a university from I was going to say old way, but let's just say the existing way of doing things based on tradition, to things based on logic and consumer needs.
Interesting.
So.
That will be interesting to see. What were some of the major ideas or approaches that stimulated your professional growth?
Well, I think one of the ideas would be the question I mentioned. John Nesbitt's raising the question, what would education look like if we were to invent it for the first time today? That's one of those where you just have to close the book, and I couldn't get that out of my head for a long time. I think the idea of, constructivism, of course, is another place where you realize, again, it's almost like I have a flat forehead because it's like, oh yeah, wow.
A lot of that.
So where you realize that people receive the same message differently, and people are incorporating everything into a structure that is unique, and how they are. So many factors determine the way that message will be received and what someone's going to do with it. But another is sort of the perspective that it's what the learner does that counts. It's the meaning that learner makes of new information, which is really, and that meaning is based a lot on activity, on what that person has an opportunity to do with that information. So so school for me became about creating a place where learners can do important things with other people, so that the kinds of things they learn are learned in an unforgettable, meaningful, transferable way. So that was kind of the transition that my thinking has gone through.
Thank you for sharing. Who are some of the people who have had the most impact on your professional growth, and how did they affect you?
Well, I'd start with my former advisor, Mike Hannafin, and the advisor of many people. He's incredibly bright, articulate, has high standards, has a great sense of humor, devotes a lot of energy to the people that he mentors. So I remember turning in, first it was chapters of that, well maybe there were things in courses, but I remember chapters for the book and getting them back. But I remember turning things into him and having them come back just marked up. And then saying that, wow, I'm sorry, I guess that wasn't very good. He said, oh no, you should see what I do to my own work too. So just understanding that our first attempts at something aren't necessarily our final attempts, or aren't necessarily as good as they can be. So he's been instrumental. Of course, all the people I work with, anybody that you spend a significant amount of time collaborating with. So that would include all my fellow faculty members that I've spent the last 26 years with at Penn State University, all amazing people. Many of our students too are they're all incredibly bright. Many have been incredibly impactful on my thinking and my work. So it's a whole village.
What would you think has been the greatest accomplishment of your career so far, and why?
I would say it's been the creation of a charter school. So there's a charter school in State College, Pennsylvania that a former student in our program, Mark Tosi, and I co-founded about 13 years ago. It's been in existence for quite a while now. And it is a place where there are about 100 students, that's a typical number, are there, and it's a hands-on, activity-oriented, multidisciplinary curriculum in a technology-rich environment where expectations of students are very high and where we care about the 21st century skills, where we care about higher order skills. So even though they can't measure in a precise way that pleases the rest of the world, things like creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, those are all things you can find ways to talk about and to assess and to think about and to improve as a result of that conversation. So I would have to say without a doubt that the most important thing I've done was really help open the door for that. And that's the only sabbatical I've taken so far, was to be there and help start that school in its beginning days. And so I basically think that my contribution there was getting it started, opening the doors for other great people to really devote a lot of time and energy. I worked on that closely for about 3 years and then sort of retreated, and I'm still a fan of the school and a supporter of the school, but they've ended up over the dozens of years working with maybe 800 students and changing students in profound ways.
Yeah.
Students, some of the students, we ended up with a bimodal population. We had a lot of kids on what would be traditionally thought of as the low end of the bell curve, right? Students for whom traditional school was not working. And then we had a bunch of very bright students who were basically bored to tears because they were not challenged. And then we had, so I guess it may not have been as bimodal as it was flat, because we had lots of kids in between too. But one of the things we learned there was that kids can come to respect each other and be respected if they get to work together and know each other. You end up finding that everybody has value, everybody has skills. That kid who's not very good in math may be a great artist. And when you work together, you find that this person has value. And they're much kinder to each other because they know each other well enough to get beyond some of the bullying and other things that go on in schools where we don't allow kids to see the value in each other. So, learned a lot on the affective side of the scale as well.
It's an incredible experience for them and I'm sure everyone involved. I would like to further that question to your greatest accomplishments in terms of AECT and your time with the organization.
My accomplishments in terms of AECT, I was president for a while at a very significant moment in the association's history. We had some financial difficulties. I'm not good with years and dates and things like that. But I offered to lead AECT at a moment when our headquarters were in Washington, D.C., and rents were crazy, and membership was low. It wasn't that low, but it wasn't growing, and there were bills had run up and so on. So there was a moment where this association almost went away. And we decided we needed to move it out of D.C. and we needed to find new leadership. We hired Phil Harris, the executive director who's here today, who agreed to stay with us for like 3 to 5 years. It's been 13, so I can do the math.
There you go.
I was right around 2000, I guess.
Okay.
And so I worked with a lot of great people, and I need to give credit to Indiana University and the great faculty that were there at the time too, because we decided to move to Bloomington. And then the faculty at IU just rallied around it and gave all kinds of support and extra energy of their own. Everything from, I rented a truck and drove it into downtown Washington, D.C. And we moved furniture out and I drove the truck out to Bloomington, Indiana. It was a touch and go moment. And then it turns out there was a financial gift that came through at the right moment and anything. So the angels rallied around AECT, as well as a lot of the gray hairs that are around today. But then again, one of the key things they realized is that gray hairs can't sustain an organization. So one of the great things that has happened is bringing in a lot more young people and a lot more energy and so on. So I think the most important thing I did for ACT was that. Now, ACT has done a lot more for me than I've done for it, so I don't want to make it sound like anything outrageous. I started as an intern, an ACT intern, when I was a grad student back in the University of Colorado back in whatever that was. I don't remember.
The math.
Yeah. I can do math again. But
Yeah.
before 80, it was probably before 85. So.
Well, thank you for that impact that you did have.
Oh, it wasn't me. It was everybody. But yeah.
Yeah.
And it happened because people cared enough about the organization, because the organization had been doing good for a lot of years. So that's what did it.
It's come through to today.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And strong now and growing.
Yeah.
It's good.
How do you want to be remembered within the profession?
I'm not sure that I will, or that I want to, because I think that the profession's about to go through great changes, and I think that people will look back, and I don't think I'll be among those to be remembered, and that's fine with me. I think that if I'm remembered, it'll be as somebody who maybe helped make it happen, helped people question whether the way we're doing things makes sense. I went on a decade of reinventing education crusade across Pennsylvania and the country, leading some very, making people think about what we know about learning and how far what we're doing is from what we know should be happening in schools, what we know about kids. And I did a really nice session where I would ask people, tell me about kids, and we focus on middle school kids, and they'd list all the characteristics and tell me about the future. So I'd have them tell me about learning, kids, and the future. And then I'd end up leading them through, I'd have them rate, I'd say, what's important for the future? And they'd list creativity, problem solving, literacy, And then I would have them in small groups rate on a scale from 1 to 10. How well do our current schools do that? And they'd give me numbers, and I'd put it in a spreadsheet, and I'd turn it into a report card. I'd average their numbers, and it would be FFFFF, DFFF. And the D was in literacy. And everything else, they said, that's not fair. I said, wait a minute, 90%'s an A, 80%'s a B, 70%'s a C. And they say, well, that's not fair. You're making me look like a failure. That's not what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to teach X. And I said, well, that's right. So what was that again? That was a list you told me it was going to take to be successful in the future. And that's not what you're supposed to do. That's the problem. Combine that with, here's what kids are like and here's what school is. And then we're not doing what we know works. So if I'm remembered, it might be for helping people rethink how different what we're doing is from what we know we should be doing.
You may have just opened some eyes.
I hope.
Yeah. And I'll turn to the last question now. What are your favorite AECT memories and any good stories you'd like to leave us with?
Yes, I have one.
Okay.
First when I read that, I thought, oh, that's a really weird question. There are lots of very fond memories, but there aren't too many that stand out as what I would call as a great story. But turns out there was one. And I'm not good with the years, but one year the conference was held in Dallas, Texas. Not known for ice and snow, but we were there, and there was an ice storm. But we, several of us, one of the things I love about ACT is you often go out at night and, get to know people. So many of us decided we were going to go to a comedy club. So I called around. There was a comedy club, what's the one with the brick wall? The Improv in Dallas. So we gathered a bunch of people. We took 3 cabs. I called first. Yes, we're open. Took 3 cabs worth of people to the Improv in Dallas. Well, we got there and it was snowing and it was bad. And we got there and they had closed. But the cabs dropped us off and left.
Oh, no.
So here are about 15 people there standing outside the Improv. They wouldn't let us in. Well, and Mike Hanifin was there and Deborah Lauder was there and Karen Jost and some others. And I don't know if I talked them into letting us in or if we just opened the door and went in. But we went in and sat down because there were no cabs. And we tried to call in cabs, but there was an ice storm and the cabs weren't coming back out. So we were basically stuck at the Improv and they had canceled the show. Excuse me. But some of the comedians were still in there, and they were leaving. They came out and saw 15 people sitting there as if there was another show. And they said, "What are you doing here?" We said, "Well, we're stuck here. We don't have cars. We don't have a cab, anything." And you closed down. So they thought that was not right. So we ended up making friends with two of the comedians, and they ended up driving us back to the hotel in their cars. And one was, like a classic '69, old thing with fins and everything. And so we all piled in like clowns in the clown car, drove back to the hotel area where we got out, and then the comedians stayed with us, and we went out and had some drinks and danced and everything like that. So we got stranded in the Improv in an ice storm in Dallas in 19XX. I don't know what it was, but that's one of my fond memories of AECT.
Well, that's a wonderful story.
Great.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And we'd like to thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, I'm very welcome. I appreciate your time and yours as well.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.